Yesterday afternoon, the Georgia Court of Appeals, this was after we were off the air, has officially accepted the case involving Fani Willis and whether or not she should be disqualified from her attempted prosecution of President Trump and others, I think 15 other individuals in that case. Remember, her special counsel has been disqualified. This was down at the trial court level, and then there was an appeal made to the Georgia Court of Appeals. Their three-judge panel, which is a randomly drawn panel. This panel is two judges that were appointed by Governor Nathan Deal, one by Governor Kemp, so all three appointed by Republicans. But again, looking at whether or not she should also be taken off this case, which would, again, probably give this to a different DA or someone else involved, and they'd have to decide whether or not to even continue to bring this case. But what's really even, I think, secondarily very important here is to go over the timeline. But what I first want to remind you of is that the ACLJ didn't wait until this moment to say, okay, we'll file now because this is at the appeal court. We actually filed an interlocutory appeal. There it is on the screen for you, which, again, asking the Georgia Court of Appeals to consider this, to make sure that they did consider and they should consider whether or not Fani Willis is appropriately in the position to prosecute this case. But the secondary issue here, I want to go right to Will Haynes on because, Will, the secondary issue is the timeline and the timing here. We, even on an expedited appeal, and we can go through it in a little more detail in a longer segment for people, but even with an expedited appeal, this is post-election now.
That's right. So
until you get a final order.
Exactly. The Georgia Court of Appeals accepted this. As you mentioned, this was brought up on interlocutory appeals. So they didn't even have to take this. They could have denied the appeal and let the case go forward. But whatever they saw in the briefing, including the one that we put forward, they decided this was something they needed to rule on. And now they've set a tentative oral argument date for October 4th. So just a month before the November election. But when you get into the details of how this court operates, it's a very busy court in Georgia, is that the Georgia Constitution mandates the matter must be decided within 2 terms of court, which means the justices would need to rule before mid-March of 2025.
2025.
Right. So now they also say they could technically do it on an expedited basis, but all the court watchers, according to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that they asked, say that most cases at this court are decided roughly 8.5 months after they're first docketed. So from now, 8.5 months, that would put it early 2025, well after the November election. Put this in the column of one more case that will not go to trial before the presidential election.
And this is not the final court in Georgia.
Correct.
I mean, this is the Georgia Court of Appeals. Then you have the Georgia Supreme Court, which you could, of course, appeal to. They don't have to take the case again, like this court did not have to take the case. But, again, that would take months as well. And this court has decided to take the case. So now we have a couple of cases we can look at. One with Fani Willis. You look at that case. You look at the case in Florida. You look at the case involving New York now at the second stage, especially of the criminal case. The case involving on the civil side, I mean, you got maybe you got through round 1s, but you're seeing how round 2 of these cases, likely you're not going to get much decision on before you've cast a vote and know who the next president of the United States will be. In fact, likely that next president of the United States will already have taken the oath of office before these cases, which will moot out potentially a lot of these cases.
Let's go to Michael calling from California on line 1. Michael, you're on Seculo.
Thank you for taking my call. There's a couple of things that I was listening to. One was from Mark Levin, and the other was Judge Joe Brown. Mark Levin was using the Constitution and saying there are statutes in our Constitution that allows those parties to expedite the situation with Trump to the highest court in the land, because that's what they did in Florida with Gore and Bush. Then also Judge Joe Brown made it clear that the Republican state governors, I believe he said, they could take it to the highest court in the land because in both cases is this franchising people like myself who want to vote for who I'm going to vote for Trump. And that's who I want to vote for because, as it's been said, We've seen Trump in action. We've seen Biden in action. Trump is a better fit for the United States of America because he puts the American people first. And this needs to be expedited because, as Mark Levin said, the longer this goes on, it destroys the presidency and it shows to other countries we're no different than they are because we use our legal system to go after.
Listen, we're going to be doing panels on the weaponization and lawfare, how it's come to the United States. And it came to the United States, I think, most prominently with the IRS going after Tea Party groups, and now most prominently with the full work of the DOJ and local, DAs as well, local law enforcement going after the leading candidate in the Republican Party right now, the de facto nominee for the Republican nomination, again, President Trump. And so all those ideas of lawfare that we've seen in other countries, that we've derided in other countries, and also prayed never became the norm in the United States of America, has now become the norm inside the Biden administration.
Well, I think that's also why you saw record-breaking fundraising for the Trump campaign after the decision. Over a 24-hour period, it was close to $53 million that was raised. Yeah. I saw some statistics that showed it was only like $20 million after the Dobbs decision came out that Act Blue got. So kind of trying to compare a big moment when it would energize a base. And it was only 20-something million after the Dobbs decision came out. When Kamala Harris was announced, I think it was also only around $20 million. Big numbers in and of themselves, but just showing how much people decided to go there. And they also looked at the records on WinRed. It crashed the site, but how many of those people had never given political donations again? It goes to Michael's point. People don't want to see 37%. Happening here in the United States what's happening in other countries, and unfortunately it looks that way.
Yeah. I mean, I was one of those people who made a donation that day. I mean, and I had made other donations in the past, but had said, you know what, this is a day we need to all speak up with our resources. It's not time yet for us to cast our votes. We can ultimately do that, but we could speak up by making sure that President Trump and his team have the resources they need, just like how you speak up to make sure the ACLJ has got the resources we need to fight these battles. Let's go back to the phones.
Elizabeth from Minnesota, you're on the air. Thank you for watching on YouTube.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. My question is that because the judge is going to be sentencing President Trump just days before the Republican convention, if he puts him in jail, how does that affect if he can't be there?
Yeah, that's when you start talking about immediate appeals, and that's when you start talking about going to other processes and maybe outside of the New York state court system, because that is just reeking, like these cases all do, of politics, Elizabeth. But I really do believe, like this judge says, he doesn't want to put President Trump in jail because of those very issues that will arise then on the First Amendment, on his ability to run a campaign. But right now, the gag order is still in place.
That's right.
And the Trump administration will, and the Trump legal team, they finally, they filed the order to remove the gag order, and they used the presidential debate as one of the reasons this needs to be done fairly quickly. And yet, Alvin Bragg didn't even go along with that, even though his case is done now. He said, no, this gag order needs to stay in effect as it's appealed.
And once again, it looks like pure politics of typically after a case, yes, you have to file the post-trial motions to get the gag order removed, but that's typically pretty routine. And what we're seeing here is that nothing is routine when Trump's derangement syndrome kicks in. And you're seeing here, unfortunately, the district attorney trying to still silence the former president.
Let me encourage you, support the work of the ACLJ financially. You know that we're ready to go and file in Manhattan Beach if we need to on Friday. Again, we're preparing to file at the Georgia Court of Appeals. We've already filed there an interlocutory appeal. They've decided to take the case on appeal. That looks like it will be in March. But we also be filing those amicus briefs before then, so we'll be doing that as well. So it is a great time to become an ACLJ donor or an ACLJ champion, which is a recurring donation to the ACLJ each month. So you could do that, become an ACLJ champion, or just donate today. But it is those dollars that make sure we are able to take on these cases without having to worry about the cost.